Hey, HOA. Today we're going to take a look at Reconstruction, starting from the time of Lincoln's death in April of 1865 and running down through the presidential election of 1868. But first, I want to spend a little time going through some of the issues that the country faces in Reconstruction and organize them into some categories that, hey, maybe you can use on your essay. So, for the political questions, the really big question is how exactly do you get the southern states back in the Union? And of course, that gets to the question of did they ever actually leave the Union? Remember, Lincoln's position was that secession never happened, that the states were never officially out. But if they were never officially out, do they actually need to be readmitted, or do they just sort of pick up where they left off? Nobody was quite sure about that. Nobody wanted, to let people back unless there had been some changes. Nobody wants to go back to 1859. So, at a minimum, if you look at Lincoln's 10% plan, they had to stop fighting, they had to pledge loyalty, and after January 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation kicks in, they have to end slavery. But there were a lot of people who wanted to see more fundamental change to really make sure that this was going to be permanent. But one of the issues when you start making fundamental changes is you can't make fundamental changes just for the southern states. Once you start changing the relationship of states and the federal government, it's going to apply to everybody. And that might dampen the enthusiasm amongst Northerners. This is something that they're going to have to live with too. Another big political question is what exactly do you do with the former Confederates? There were some people who just wanted to have treason trials and string them all up, or at least deny them the right to vote and their citizenship rights. But the problem is, how deep are you going to go with that? While that might make sense for sort of the leadership of the Confederacy, a lot of just ordinary Southerners kind of got in this thing with a whole lot less voluntariness. People got drafted. People had to pay their taxes or they would go to jail. Are you going to call them supporters of the Confederacy? And are you going to suspend their rights forever? And keep in mind, the more you suspend somebody's rights, the less likely they are to be loyal to the country. You don't want to push people away. You want to kind of draw them in and get them to participate voluntarily. But that brings up the question of what about the political status of the freedmen? The Dred Scott decision had said that African Americans, free or slave, were not citizens of the United States. What's going to happen to that idea? Can we have people not be slaves, but still not be full citizens? Is that going to work? And if they're citizens, does that mean they're going to have voting rights? There were certainly female citizens were citizens and didn't have voting rights, so it's not automatic. But are they going to be able to protect themselves politically if they don't have the vote? And does that mean they're going to be office holders? There was a lot of concern about whether former slaves were really going to be able to jump right into this, given that they lacked education and literacy and that kind of thing. Lincoln, by April of 1865, had been pretty clear he wanted to see full citizenship for veterans. If you had put on the Union uniform and fought for the Union, he's not going to tell you, thank you very much, you're not a citizen. But there was a lot of concern about, how deep that was going to go down through the freedmen. And could you do just some people? Is there any logical basis for cutting that off? Nobody really knows. Lincoln certainly doesn't know. He's kind of winging this thing. And there's this whole question about what's the Republican Party all about at this point. The party had been formed in 1854 pretty much on the issue of expansion of slavery. That was the one thing that everybody agreed on. And remember, this is a fairly unwieldy coalition of people who don't agree on very much. You had former Whigs who didn't want slavery to expand, and they had kind of their financial platform that goes all the way back to really Alexander Hamilton. You had abolitionists who didn't really care about anything except ending slavery, and not just ending slavery, but full and equal rights for the freedmen. And then you had the Free Soilers, who were pretty much Democrats, and they had left the Democratic Party over the issue of expansion of slavery. That's not an issue anymore. So, are they going to go back home to the Democratic Party, or are they going to stay in the Republican Party? Without expansion of slavery as an issue, once the war started, the war was kind of an issue. Win the war, reunite the Union. Okay, you've done that. You've done that. The Republican Party looked like it might be a victim of its own success. Does it really have a reason to keep going after 1865? And then this whole question of, is the war really over? And if the war is over, can the soldiers come home and get back to their normal lives? Northerners didn't want to go back to 1859. They didn't want to go back to a situation where, the country's a powder keg and the two sections are at each other's throats. But they also don't want this, wartime situation to continue forever. Nobody's got the stomach for a permanent military occupation of the South and to force them to comply with something, at the point of a gun. So there's a general feeling that whatever Reconstruction is, it needs to be wrapped up relatively quickly, or at least, gotten beyond the point of being militarily imposed. But there's also a lot of economic issues involved in this, and those are really even more intractable because there's only so much you can do economically. The Southern economy needed to be reconstructed. It needed to get back up on its feet. In April of 1865, there isn't much left of the Southern economy. A lot of the cotton plantations were pretty much shut down. Cotton trade had certainly been shut down ever since 1861. And there wasn't a whole lot else in the South to support people. So you got a lot of hungry people. You got a lot of people who have been wiped out financially. And how do you get things back up and going again? You had a lot of talk about, industrialization, and won't that be great? But that's not something you can do in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. That's a project for years, maybe decades. In the meantime, if you're going to modernize the South, if you're going to fix the damage and drag the South into the modern era, you're going to need money, and that money is going to have to come from taxes. And those taxes are going to have to pretty much involve the production and exportation of cotton. And that means somebody's going to have to pick that cotton, and that somebody is going to be the freedmen. Freedmen had other ideas. They wanted, they wanted land that would support their families and be small farmers and, kind of embrace that American ideal. But the sad fact was there wasn't enough land in the hands of the federal government to be able to do that for every freedman. And so how could you possibly, pick and choose amongst them? And even if they got their small farms, they're not going to be generating taxes. And taxes is what the South really needs at this point. The money isn't going to come from the North. The North is pretty clear that, they paid for the war. They paid to do all this damage to the South, but they're sure not going to pay to clean it up. They're not at fault for the war. The South is at fault for the war, and the South should, deal with its own problems. But remember, when you're talking about the South, you're not just talking about Confederates. You're talking about white people that didn't support the Confederacy. They're going to have to live with this mess. And of course, you're talking about the freedmen. who also, they're not going to be successful unless the South as a whole is successful, because the North certainly isn't interested in all those people moving north and looking for jobs up there. And then we have the social questions, which are maybe the most intractable of all because they get into human psychology. You remember back when we were talking about colonial times, back in the 1600s, there had been a sort of an informal bargain between the Southern elites and the Southern non-elites of a white nature. And that deal was basically, we're going to have slavery, and you're going to not have a problem with that. Even though you guys don't own slaves, you're not going to interfere with us having slaves. And in return for that, we're going to make sure that you are in the middle of the social pyramid, that you are going to have the benefit of being a white person, and by virtue of that, superior to all of the non-white people down below you. Even if you don't have any money, even if you don't own any land, you're going to have a certain level of equality, or at least superiority to those guys at the bottom of the pile. Now, when you throw that out, that sort of social bargain that had been reached back in the 1600s, what's going to replace it? And if you're a poor farmer sitting there in the middle of the social pyramid, you don't have any money, your economic prospects are particularly bad, you got to worry about, am I going to sink to the bottom of this social pyramid? And are those other people going to get ahead of me? And nobody wants to go down on that social pyramid. Everybody is kind of hanging on to whatever status they've got. And that's going to make it very difficult, because you can't move up the people at the bottom without somebody, at least a relative nature, moving down. Bottom line is the non-slaveholding, or at least the small slaveholders, these guys who maybe own a little bit of land and had one or two slaves, but still do their own work, or the people who didn't own land, the white people who didn't own land and are just kind of barely getting by. If we're going to get rid of the grand bargain of the 1600s, these guys are going to have to form an alliance with the freedmen and say, guys, we have a lot in common. We're all farmers. We're all trying to earn a living. We're all, trying to provide for our families. And those rich guys are the ones who cause all the problems. If they can do that, if they can make that switch, they're going to have a huge amount of economic and political power. They're going to be able to take control of the South away from the elites. But that's a big leap in the dark. As a white guy, looking at that prospect, the fear is still in the back of your mind about what happened in Haiti. When they took their boot off of the neck of the former slaves in Haiti, they pretty much killed everybody, and that was the end of everything. Probably that was an unreasonable fear in the South, because in the South, the slaves aren't really in the majority. They're still a minority, and they're going to have to deal with that. But it's still going to be a big leap to expect white Southerners to kind of throw away, 250 years of tradition and social practice and just sort of take a wild leap into the dark and hope it's going to work out. But Lincoln was kind of hoping that they would do that. Lincoln believed that if he could get all of these small farmers, regardless of race, regardless of where they were in the country, and get them all kind of on the same page, Republicans could represent them. Republicans stood for, building infrastructure and schools, and developing the West, and creating opportunities, and a strong economy, and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know that Lincoln really, kind of was sure that he knew exactly how to do this, but he knew that he should at least try. And to do that, he understood that he's going to need white Southerners on board for this. You have to get them to voluntarily participate. You can't force this down their throat. So he wants an easy peace. Hard war, easy peace. He told his generals, once they surrender, treat them gently. The whole point of the 10% plan had been an easy transition back into the Union. He's trying to build goodwill, and he's hoping that that goodwill can protect the freedmen. Because at the end of the day, if the South is still democratic, the majority of control is going to be in the hands of white people. And only if those white people are willing to extend the hand of equality to the freedmen are the freedmen going to be able to protect themselves. The radical Republicans see this differently. Guy in the picture here is Congressman Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania, who is a staunch abolitionist before the war, had gotten into the Republican Party on that basis. He wants major change, fundamental change in the South. He's sure that if we don't uproot all of the tentacles of slavery from the Southern political system, from the Southern economy, from the Southern social system, it's just going to backslide into maybe not slavery, but something that looks an awful lot like slavery. And truth be told, he's absolutely right. Spoiler alert, that's what's going to happen. But Thaddeus Stevens, in trying to prevent this, in a lot of ways, is making it worse. He's going at this in a very punitive way. He wants to punish the South. He wants to forcibly reform the South. The idea of being easy on the South, is not something that he's got any interest in. And what he's hoping is, once the freedmen get full rights, particularly if you can disenfranchise former Confederates long enough, you might be able to cobble together a political majority out of that's going to protect the Republican Party. That's not going to happen. Now, Andrew Johnson has got his own point of view. Johnson's a Jacksonian Democrat. And if you remember Andrew Jackson, that's all about the rights of the little white guy. He's not a huge fan, Johnson isn't, of the elites. Just like Andrew Jackson, he believes that those guys are troublemakers. Johnson represented Eastern Tennessee. He was in the United States Senate. He's the only U.S. senator who did not leave the Senate when his state seceded. He stuck around. That kind of brought him to Lincoln's attention. And when Lincoln was looking for a vice president in 1864, when he was trying to reach out to war Democrats, and Johnson was certainly a war Democrat, he's the guy Lincoln tapped. Now, it turned out Lincoln didn't need to worry about the support of the war Democrats, but there's Andrew Johnson already in the vice presidency. And so we get this incredibly unique situation in American history where the president dies and the vice president who takes over in his place is a member of the other party, which is definitely going to cause Johnson a lot of grief with the Republican Congress. Now, Johnson believed the real bad guys in the Civil War were the elites. They were the ones who started the war. They were the ones who wanted to secede. The little white guy, the guy who got drafted into the Confederate Army, the guy who was just, trying to get by, is not the bad guy, according to Andrew Johnson. So Johnson wants to restore the Union quickly. He's, fine with getting rid of slavery, but he really doesn't want those revolutionary social and economic changes, not because he doesn't want to punish the white elite, but because he feels like if those changes happen, they're going to fall most heavily on the little white guy. The rich guys can always protect themselves. The rich guys always make out okay. It's the little guy that gets the brunt of it. And those are the guys that Andrew Johnson are looking out for. He doesn't want those low status white people to fall out of their spot in the middle of the social pyramid and end up at the bottom. And that's going to pretty much be the driving force for everything that Andrew Johnson does as president. And that's going to make him, oddly enough, in tune with the Southern elite. The Southern elite understands that secession failed, that it was done. There's no way the Southern states are ever going to be independent. They understood that the South was no longer going to be the dominant region in the United States the way it had been in the early 1800s. They understood that slavery was done. Formal slavery was out the window. But for Alexander Stephens here in this picture, the former vice president of the Confederacy, what he's trying to do is preserve as much of the old order as possible. Now, Johnson was doing it to preserve the position of the little white guy in the middle. Alexander Stephens is trying to preserve the position of the rich white guy at the top. And as long as they navigate this correctly, they'll still be at the top. It might be a much smaller pyramid, but they'll still be at the top. So their goal is minimize economic and social change and maintain the alliance with the yeoman farmers and their alliance with Northern Democrats. Because, if everything works out, the Democrats will go back to being the majority party. And they won't be able to retain power. The Democrats are going to need Southern votes. And Stephens believes that that will be enough to get them to leave the South alone to manage its own affairs. And we all know what that means. All right. So Andrew Johnson, when he becomes president, he's pretty much continuing with what Lincoln had already started in the 10% plan. But now that the war is over, kind of everybody is interested in pledging loyalty to the Union. Nobody wants to keep fighting. So Johnson is going to use the presidential pardon power, which is an absolute power that the president has, to grant blanket amnesty to most Southerners. Anybody in the Confederate Army below the rank of major got a full pardon. Any Southerner civilian who maybe paid taxes to the Confederacy or something like that, as long as he was his net worth was under $20,000, blanket pardon, done. Stroke of the pen, no treason trials, no hangings, none of that. Now, for the Southern elite, Johnson wants them, they have to come in person and get a personal pardon. Now, I think Johnson's thinking on this is he wants to send a message to these guys that they have, in fact, lost the war. They are going to have to come to Washington. They are going to have to go to the White House. They are going to have to say pretty please to the President of the United States and ask for a pardon. And Johnson's going to give it to him, but he wants to communicate that the federal government is supreme in this situation. It's a very Jacksonian move. He also, I think, kind of likes the idea that these rich white Southerners who, as he was growing up as an illiterate tailor, they looked down on him, and he did not have any kind of social status with these guys. And now they're having to come in and swallow their pride and acknowledge his position. And I think he got some joy out of that. But once they got their pardon, they're not going to have any problem with Andrew Johnson, because Andrew Johnson and the Southern elite have got pretty much the same objective. Get this thing over with as quickly as possible. We call this presidential reconstruction because the president, first Lincoln and now Johnson, is pretty much running this on his own. Congress was out of session when Johnson became president in April 1865, and it wasn't scheduled to come back in until December. So Johnson says, I had 8 months to get this thing done, and then I will hand it to Congress as a done deal, and there won't be anything they can do about it. So as the amnesties and pardons come through, the Southerners who have been amnestied and pardoned, they are going to have, voting rights, and they can adopt new state constitutions, remove all the slavery stuff, and then they can hold elections, elect state officials, and everything's good to go. The other thing, significant thing that Andrew Johnson is going to do is all of that land that the federal government held, whether they had gotten it through the Confiscation Act or through some military action, or because taxes didn't get paid during the war or whatever, a lot of land which had been in the custody of the Freedmen's Bureau, and a lot of the guys in Congress wanted to divide that land up and distribute it amongst the freedmen. Johnson said, no, not going to do that. That would be bad for the Southern economy. That would create too much social disruption. We're going to give all that land back to the people who owned it before the war. War is over now, and seizing that land was a war measure. Now, not going to be the case. And of course, these Southern elites are very happy about this. But Johnson, I think, is not doing it so much to reward them as he's doing it so that cotton production can get up and running and taxes can get collected as quickly as possible. But of course, this is not going to be good news for the freedmen. But the real bad news for the freedmen is going to be the laws that these new presidentially reconstructed governments are going to pass. Having taken slavery out of their legal code, they had to define what exactly is the status of all these former slaves. And it's not going to be much. They passed these laws called Black Codes. And under these laws, a Negro, former slave, or guy who had been free all his life, not a citizen, and in those days, states defined who was and who was not a citizen. They couldn't own land. They couldn't own property. They couldn't carry weapons. And the real one, the one that was really tough, had to either have a job or they would be arrested. Had to have a certificate from their employer that says, I am employing this guy. The idea was if you didn't have that, you were a vagrant. You were a burden on the community, probably living by a life of crime, and so we will just arrest you on general principle. And having arrested you, then your labor could be hired out without paying you anything to whoever needed some extra cotton pickers. So your choice as a freedman would be take a job from probably your former owner on his cotton plantation, getting back to doing whatever it was you were doing before the war, at whatever he decides to pay you or not pay you. And if you don't do that, you can do it for free. So, take it or leave it. That's not a very good negotiating position, and that's certainly not what the Republicans had in mind when they talked about, ending slavery and going to a free labor system. Oh, and by the way, you can't travel, be out at night, you can't go anywhere without a pass. Pretty much slavery without, the actual formal name. Now, Congress is watching all this over the summer and fall of 1865 and just really getting steamed about it. There wasn't anything they could do until Congress came back into session in December. And when they did, all of these presidentially reconstructed states have sent newly elected congressmen and senators to Washington, and they have in their hand their certificates of election from their presidentially reconstructed state, and they are expecting to get seats in Congress. And among these are, Confederate generals, Alexander Stephens, former vice president of the Confederacy, people who, Congress would like to hang from the end of a rope. And here they are wanting membership in the body. Well, the Republicans are going to say no. Just as Johnson has the power to grant pardons, Congress has the power to judge the elections of members of Congress. And they're going to say, these are not valid because those states are not properly reconstructed. They are not proper states. The Democrats, of course, go crazy about this, but there's not a whole lot they can do about it. The Republican message to these states is, we're going to need you to do some other things before we let your representatives in here, and when we figure out what those things are, we will let you know. One thing that they were going to do is pass the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And this was an attempt to basically use federal law to circumvent the black codes. So the Civil Rights Act grants citizenship to all of basically everybody born in the United States is a citizen of the United States, regardless of their race or their previous condition of servitude. And being citizens of the United States, they have the right to due process, to testify in court, to take cases to court, to own property, to do kind of all the stuff that citizens do. And you cannot, as a state, treat citizens differently based on their race or their former condition of servitude. And there are criminal penalties for this. If a state official abuses the civil rights of a citizen of the United States, they can be dragged into federal court on a federal criminal charge and thrown into a federal penitentiary. So this is tough stuff. Now, is this constitutional? That's a good question. Supreme Court said Negroes were not citizens based on the Constitution. Can Congress repeal that with something, ordinary legislation? Johnson says no. Andrew Johnson vetoes the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and Congress passes it over his veto. But they know that the constitutional aspect of this is a little shaky. At that same time, there's a lot of violence erupting in the South, particularly in Memphis and New Orleans. And it's interesting that it's Memphis and New Orleans, because these are cities that had been occupied by the Union Army fairly early, in 1862. So this is 4 years. These cities have been essentially under Army control, under martial law. Lincoln had sort of been taking steps to reconstitute state governments, but those hadn't really had a whole lot of power. The power had been in the hands of the Union Army. But now it's the summer of 1866, and soldiers are being withdrawn. Power is being turned over to those presidentially reconstructed governments with their black codes and their former Confederate officials. At the same time, soldiers from the Confederate Army have made their way back to Memphis and New Orleans after having been away for the duration of the war. And also coming home are African Americans who were Union soldiers during the war. So you've got the Army, which had been maintaining stability in these areas, is moving out. You got two groups of people who aren't really very fond of each other. White Confederates who have got a chip on their shoulder because they lost the war. Black Union soldiers who have got a bit of swag now because they won the war. And these groups are not going to have very much success. There's a whole lot more of the white people than there are of the black people, and they are going to use this opportunity to reassert social dominance. And they're going to do that at the point of a gun. While the state and local officials are looking the other way and not interfering, mobs of white people are going to attack black people, burn down schools that had been built by the Freedmen's Bureau, burn down houses, engage in intimidation, outright shoot people who seem to be troublemakers and don't know their place. This is pretty much the nightmare that the Republicans in Washington had been most afraid of. I mean, this is graphic evidence of what is coming in the South if Johnson's plan continues the way it's going. And this is going to really kind of push the moderates and the radicals together. They know that they're going to have to work together to do something about this. The moderates are very nervous about social and economic change, but they're not going to sit by and do nothing while the slavery in all but name gets reconstituted in the South. So they're going to pass the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment is basically taking the Civil Rights Act as an act of Congress and turning it into part of the Constitution so that nobody can claim that it's unconstitutional. But a change in the Constitution is going to require ratification by 3/4 of the states. And there aren't enough northern states to hit that mark. You're going to need some southern states along with this, and the southern states are very much opposed to the 14th Amendment and everything it stands for. This is citizenship and rights for everybody, and by everybody we mean especially the freedmen. And that's kind of the situation as we're going into the 1866 congressional elections. Johnson at this point is he's totally abandoned his alliance with the Republicans. He is campaigning as a Democrat for Democrats to be elected to Congress. And those Democrats are opposed to the Civil Rights Act of 1866, opposed to the 14th Amendment. The moderate and radical Republicans have to work together. Johnson is saying, Congress is illegitimate because they haven't seated all the members, it's clear that the Republicans got to hang together. The country as a whole is more responsive to the Republicans. They see, Johnson as, trying to basically give away everything that was won during the war, and they didn't really have the stomach for that. So going to be a big year for the Republicans, and when they come out of this, they are going to have very much a veto-proof majority. They have enough votes to pretty much shut down Johnson on anything he wants to do. And that is going to move us to the period we call congressional Reconstruction, because President is no longer in the driver's seat, Congress is in the driver's seat. When they pass their Reconstruction Acts, Johnson can veto them all he wants, but they override Johnson's veto. And the Reconstruction Act is it's not going to eliminate the presidentially reconstructed state governments. It's just going to, remove all their power. Congress is going to send the Army back into those Confederate states, and martial law is going to be declared. The Army is going to run things. The state and local governments aren't going to have any power. And one of the things that the Army is going to do is register the freedmen to vote and guarantee their civil rights and punish anybody who interferes with that. But at the same time, they're going to eliminate voting rights for anyone who supported the Confederacy. And that's pretty much most of the white population of the South. So this is going to be a real tough pill for the Southerners to swallow. The idea that they're going to lose their voting rights potentially for a generation. The only people in the South who are not going to fall into this are going to be diehard Unionists who are pretty thin on the ground, and people who had moved to the South from the North and were now living there. And of course, the freedmen. And the radicals and moderates are hoping that, amongst these three groups, you'll be electing Republicans to run these states. And we're going to kind of see how that works. But part of the deal is going to be, if you want congressional representation, you got to ratify the 14th Amendment first. Not exactly what the framers had in mind when they drafted Article 5, but, that's the way it's going to go. Johnson doesn't like this, any of this, and he's going to try and use his power as commander-in-chief of the military to sort of order the military to not do some of this stuff. But the military at this point can see which way the wind is blowing. They can see that Johnson is not the power center, and one does not want to be a Johnson supporter when Johnson finally falls. Congress is going to impeach him. Impeached by the House, he's going to be tried by the Senate. He doesn't get removed. He comes one vote away from getting removed. And I think at the end of the day, it was the moderate Republicans who weren't quite willing to remove a president of the United States for what was essentially a political disagreement. Nobody seriously believed that Johnson had actually committed high crimes and misdemeanors. It was, solely a matter of a political disagreement. And that wasn't a precedent that the moderates wanted to set. But it didn't really matter. I mean, it's March of 1868. There's 1 year left in his term. He doesn't really have the power to do very much. And Johnson is, going to be kind of a spent force. Johnson is going to attempt to get the Democratic nomination for president in 1868. The Democrats aren't having any of it. They know that Johnson is tremendously unpopular, and they do not want a Southerner at the top of their ticket. They had a hard time finding a candidate, but they eventually settle on Governor Horatio Seymour, former governor of New York, who is going to be the Democratic nominee. The Republicans are going to nominate the hero of the Civil War, General Ulysses Grant. And the campaign of 1868 is going to be really, really viciously racist. The argument for the Democrats is the United States is a white man's country, and white man's rights must be protected, and we don't want to do anything for the freedmen. We don't want to give them rights in the South, and we sure as heck don't want them moving north. And that's pretty much the campaign from the Democrats. On the Republican side, it's look at those guys. Don't vote the Confederates into office. They're trying to win the Civil War by political means. Back up Grant, back up the Republicans, back up the victory in the Civil War, and I don't want to be a spoiler here, but if you're familiar with whose face is on the $50 bill, you kind of know how this is going to come out. So next time we'll talk about how this Reconstruction is going to be dealt with by the new president and how things are going to work under congressional Reconstruction. Until then, thank you for listening.